welcome to another video here on the Critical Focus channel. First off, a big shout out to all my members who support my work and keeps the paint flowing and the electricity running. Members do get access to the member Discord, will influence the content, the matchups, whatnot. There is a join button below if you feel so inclined. But regardless, I am happy for your support in the form of actually just watching the video, of a like and a comment, and if you haven't already, please do feel free to subscribe as well. And if you are looking to buy Warhammer merch, there is an affiliate link in the video description as well. Let's get on with the video. So I was, as on every Wednesday, basically starting my day with a cup of yo and the Warhammer Weekly show at Vince Venturalla's channel, which is just really chill, and I love his sort of straightforward, no bullshit approach to delivering his opinions on all things wargaming, but mostly Age of Sigmar. And every week he basically has a different theme to his show and often a different guest host as well. Well, anyway, this week his topic of choice was lore representation versus battle profile representation and the possible discrepancies between the two for a select number of units and heroes across the Age of Sigmar range. And I thought, why not do something similar for Warhammer Underworlds? And as I thought the topic was really interesting and I loved listening to it. Obviously a few of them like Nagash and Archeon and such iconic units has such a huge representation in the lore that we hardly can compete with our minuscule warriors in Warhammer Underworlds, but I'm gonna do my darnest to try anyway. A lot of the warbands are basically named versions of Age of Sigmar units after all, so yeah, there should be some lore to delve into. Let's try right. I've selected a handful of warbands that I find rather spicy lore-wise, and I am gonna delve a bit into their lore. Both their warband specific lore and even if not very rich, also the lore for their faction, sub-faction or unit type, what have you, and see how they hold up against the rules on the tabletop. Vince basically put these units in his own style of tier list, ranging from sort of larger than life to straight lies, with the former being sort of these guys are way better and cooler than they should be, while straight lies obviously meant they were done very dirty. I'm not gonna bother with tier lists for this one, as I find it rather tedious, but I will give my 2 cents on how I think they hold up. It's not a straight up quote, are they as powerful in the game as they are described in the lore comparison, as that's rather dull, and basically everything except grots or clan rats are described as being the meanest and baddest, most terrible thing you can come across according to the novels in the Black Library range. So I hope to go beyond that and sort of delve more into the are their tricks and abilities a good representation of how they are described in the lore kind of a deal. I'm gonna do a bit of a spread across the sort of grand alliances and pick my not necessarily favorite warbands to play, but rather my favorite warbands lore-wise and model-wise from each faction and see how they hold up. And to keep things relevant, I'm gonna stay within what's tournament legal right now. I'm gonna try and chuck 2 warbands inside each episode, as I would like to keep the runtime down somewhat. And the editing is also less tedious to do if I do sort of keep them in bite-sized episodes. I'm gonna start with the Death faction and kick things off with Zondara's Gravebreakers. So Zondara was once a Gurish wizard. For you unversed in Age of Sigmar lore, or the lore of the Immortal Realms, Gur is the realm of beasts, pretty much where both Beastgrave, Deathgorge, Gnarlwood and its respective prequel seasons of Dire Chasm, Wintermoor and Word Hollow takes place. The magic is actually called Amber magic, and you might recall Amber being a prominent feature in Beastgrave and Dire Chasm, with several weapons etc. made up of the very substance. Her hubby, Furline, got lost to a terrible curse, and bereft of other means to try and save him, she took to necromancy after stealing a necromantic tome in a last-ditch effort to get him back to his former self. Apparently her current magic is a mix of beast magic of Gurish origin then, and the energies of death. That would be the Shyish magic then. For you painters, you might have come across Shyish purple, as the purple is the color of Shyish, the realm of death. She ransacks crypts, keeps and dungeons in search of a cure for the disease, and she's indeed come all the way to Wintermoor, which is quite a desolate place, so she's really desperate. It is also said that Zondara infuses her minions with savage, gurish magic, granting them bestial strength, even in undeath, taking them way above their station as mere animated zombies. Furline, the lost hubby, is still sticking around in the form of a frenzied brute who messily dismembers those who threatens Zondara. And lastly, Zondara commands her minions to leave, quote, no stones unturned in her search to break the curse of Furline. So it is not specified what Furline actually is, but I suppose a werewolf without the means to revert back to human form would be the closest thing, I guess. So if we start looking at the main mover here, Zondara herself, he has a sort of a decent amount of wounds, which seems pretty fitting for a leader, but rather weak defense, which is perfectly acceptable for a moldy, rag-clad wearing wizard, focusing mostly on controlling her subjects rather than on face-first brawling. Her hand-to-hand fighting abilities, though, are not too shabby, and maybe even a bit too good in my opinion, but also not overly strong. With a ranged attack representing her like offensive spellcasting, being, as all spellcasting in this game basically, not very strong but rather accurate. She is a very experienced wizard after all. Even if she took to necromancy rather late in life, she has been slinging amber magic for quite some while. Furline is both more durable as well as more agile with that double defense, which seems spot on, with his attacks up front just barely better than his mistress with 3 damage on the crit, but it's not too far off I guess. He's more rabid and crazed rather than a trained killer, so for him to be super accurate would have felt a bit off. Inspired, he picks up a baseline Grievous but keeps swinging a bit wild. Cracktomb, Toil and Pick have suitably semi-okay profiles, not very accurate but as described in the lore hitting above their station with every one of them arriving on 2 damage sooner or later. The War Scroll then, immediately after a minion is raised they inspire. I guess that sort of makes sense since that's the point. The magic gets imbued in them and when they would naturally be at their strongest. Starting the game they have naturally been around for a while, not freshly raised so to speak, with the magic then I guess tapering off, at least that's my logic. As for the 2 main fighters, they inspire when the other is given their second or subsequent upgrade. I think this sort of makes sense from Zondara's standpoint. Upgrades gets dug up and chucked onto her lover in hopes that it is the one cure. I can see how that would get her hopes up and inspire her, but I don't really see how the beast should care for what trinkets Zondara puts up her knickers. He does have some minuscule fragment of sentience I guess left, but it's not more than the very sparse sort of glimmer. He's likely not very intelligible or verbal and should really not have much of a grasp of what's going on beyond ripping up his opponent and protecting his lover. It would, in my opinion, make more sense for him to inspire from landing successful attacks or supporting Zondara, as that is sort of the height of his intelligence really. He is not much more than an animal after all. The Gravebreaker ability to me is totally fine and very lore accurate, where you keep frantically digging up feature tokens looking for the cure or raising slain fighters to join in the cause of doing so. For the other abilities, Destined means that one lover gets stronger and faster when the other one dies. I can get behind this I guess. Overcome by total and murderous grief wouldn't necessarily make you more accurate with the +1 dice here, but I can see how it would make you faster and maybe hit harder, but piling on damage is not something done lightly in this game, so I guess the +1 dice will suffice. The next one is called Undying Love and heals one and pushes the other one closer to the other one. Despite the darkness grasping them both, they are still devoted to each other. A sort of love heals all wounds and keeps us together sort of a deal, and I have no complaints with this either. It seems fitting to the lore. So that is it for Zondara's Gravebreakers. I think mostly they've nailed this warband pretty well, as they did in the first iteration. As I said, maybe Furline could be even more of a beast, and Zondara maybe toned down in her melee to balance out the 2 fighters, as they basically start out very equally strong in hand-to-hand fighting, which feels off to me. Her ranged spell isn't amazing, but her magic is mostly bound up on the war scroll and the fact that her minions are made into stronger versions of zombies from her magic. They are hitting beyond their station. So I have no real issues with her sort of ranged attack being sort of meh. I would like to see a tweak to how Furline inspires. That would be my one big beef with the War Scroll, as it doesn't really make sense to me. So let's move on to my second Death Warband of choice. And talking about choice, these guys are quite picky in their choice of meat. Let's take a look at the Skinnerkin. The Skinnerkin is a warband of delusional ghouls, like every ghoul, and in their own minds they are cooks, hunting for the most exquisite, perfect cuts of meat in the realms, and they do so to perfect the banquet of the Summer King's feasts. The Summer King is of course Ushuran, also known as the Blood Rose Prince, and Ushuran the Handsome, who was actually originally a fair servant of Nagash, who was transformed into a mockery of his former self after falling from Nagash's favor. And that is sort of the origin of the whole Flesh-Eater Court's curse of delusion. Being ghouls, they are in fact humanoid cannibals that have consumed flesh from an abhorrent ghoul king, which thus then transformed them into pale horrors that share their king's delusions and become convinced that they are nobles, peasants, soldiers, or in this case royal cooks, rather than monstrous cannibals under the service of a bestial vampire. This transformative curse is ancient and powerful, and its victims are spread across the realms, gathering flesh from living and dead alike for their king's pleasure. So getting back on the specifics on this warband, they were lured to Deathgorge by rumors of a unique and ancient beasts preserved perfectly in the Everwinter's ice, and therefore offering rare and unique cuts of meat. The Everwinter is of course the magical winter that the ogres of the Ogre Maw tribes brings along with them. Leading them all is Grisla Tenderhook, her name a not so subtle hint at her own arm being replaced with a large butcher's hook. She is apparently one of the absolutely favorite butchers of Ushran himself, and her body has been twisted and scarred by her long years of service, but with undiminished skill to boot. She is a very vocal leader, especially if her staff disappoints her in acquiring the prime cuts after a completed hunt. With her comes two apprentices in young Master Kretch and Cedric the Shane. Kretch is enduring withering abuse from Grisla, and the occasional use as a living shield should an enemy threaten her, all in the name of refining the arts of butchery and cooking for nobility, of course. The other apprentice, Cedric the Shane, is less experienced than Kretch, which basically means that he has suffered less abuse and has not yet mastered proper filleting. Flen's Master Pudrich is in charge of preparing the fresh kills, and as a veteran of Grisla's kitchen, he offers advice to the apprentices and gives feedback on the wide variety of dishes the Skinnerkin has on their grisly menu. Lastly, Karnskur is a malformed beast that only answers to Grisla, and his only role is to guard the larder. She is very insistent that the rest of the staff treats it with respect, as Grisla claims Karnskur is in fact a visiting foreign envoy. So there's probably even more lore I could dig up, but yeah, that's plenty, and the Flesh-Eater Courts are obviously a very flavorful faction, and this bunch doesn't disappoint, so how could the War Scroll possibly hold up to all this? Let's take a look, shall we? If we visit the fighter cards first, we find Grisla a fairly reliable hitter for 2 damage, fairly sturdy on 4 health, low defense, who together with Kretch is responsible for tallying up the fillets on the roll of a crit with that special weapon ability. Her scarred body, who is weighed down by the huge contraption on her back as well as the long arduous service for Ushuran, has left her with a meager move of 3, which is fine for human, but very low for a ghoul. Inspired, she picks up the fillet keyword flat, not needing a crit to do that stuff, and picks up a 4th sword for a very reliable attack, which I think is fitting for a favored butcher of Ushuran. I think she lives up well to the lore, stat-wise dangerous but slow and more relying on bulk and brawn than on speed or dodging. The rest of the bunch are lightning fast with 4 uninspired move to 5, while the Karlskyr starts on 5 already, which is on par with your bread and butter ghoul, being the 6-inch movers in Age of Sigmar, compared to most other units moving 5. Kretch is an interesting beast. He lost accuracy for damage in the last iteration. Here he loses defense instead, swapping out 1 shield to 1 dodge. Maybe a representation of that line in the lore of Gristla, sometimes using him as a human shield from time to time. Something like Gristla being able to hand over incoming damage to an adjacent Kretch would have been a lot more fun and thematic. But anyways, it's something at least. He is next to Gristla the heaviest hitter, barring inspired Pudrich, and it feels fitting given the respectable size of his axe that he's sort of riding like a Nimbus 2000. Cedric the Chain is the other apprentice, and his stats are sort of the scruffiest, with 3 swords and snare from range 3 for a single damage. He is rather nimble though, picking up 2 dodge on the inspired side, but lacking a range 1 attack sets him apart from the other guys. And as his lore bit hints at, he has not yet filleted that much, and indeed lacks that ability as well. Then we have Pudrich the Flancemaster. He is a crit grievous hitter on 1 damage over 3 swords, so sort of an okay profile, but I guess him being Kretch's and Cedric's senior, his stats feels a bit off to me, at least uninspired. He does pick up 4 swords with flat grievous inspired, as well as a second dodge on his inspired profile, so it's quite respectable, even if preparing the meat isn't really represented in its stats. Lastly, we have the foreign envoy, the Karlskyr, who swoops over the battlefield protecting the kitchen, and his special dealio is not found on his fighter card, but rather on the war scroll, with him scratching intruders, picking up fillets from an elevated position and pushing them out from the kitchen, I presume, with this ability. I guess if you view friendly territory as the kitchen, it would make more lore sense to me if the push was towards enemy territory or away from friendly territory. It's obviously much better to have it in any direction, but yeah, that's my 2 cents. They're inspired seems pretty spot on. After acquiring the juicy steaks, they get happy. Can't complain with that, seems fitting. Get the meat, head back to the kitchen and make Ushuran happy. The abilities then, who all cite Gore Meat Rib Splitter's Cookbook. Seems like a fun read, by the way. First one is called Calloused Hands, and it tells us that sustaining injuries in the kitchen is inevitable, and many chefs argue that suffering from your art improves the quality of the meat. So the effect means you automatically counts as having more critical successes than the attacker for the purpose of the standfast rule. Not a half bad ability, really, ignoring driveback, and it seems to align well with the lore text in my opinion. Grasping whatever they have in their hands to negate intruders from getting into the kitchen. The next one lets anyone use the crit fillet once per round, and the fluff text here tells us filleting is a quick process if you are a buffoon with no appreciation for fine arts. So this would be sort of budget shitty kind of filleting done by one of the lesser members of the warband, and the lore seems to align well with the mechanic here as well. The last one is called More for the Pantry, and the lore text comes from the Final Thoughts chapter of the aforementioned cookbook. Good food, if nothing else, should bring people together. That sounds pretty nice. It means one of your moved or charged fighters are allowed to push 1 hex to be adjacent to food. Enemy fighters, which is pretty much the same thing. Yeah, I think they did pretty well with this warband in terms of linking the lore with the mechanics. Stats feels mostly on point, with Gristla being this worn out but sturdy, competent, slowly moving bulk of a leader, while her underlings are faster but more fragile on 3 wounds. If anything could be improved upon, I guess it's cementing that sense of your own territory being sort of the makeshift kitchen. We had cards in the old version that related to friendly territory being just that, and I would have liked to see some sort of representation of that in the rules. We do get it with Grimwatch, where friendly fighters gets a 1 round reroll for saves while defending sort of the hearth. Anyways, that's it for the first iteration of this new and goofy series I've apparently started now. It would be super helpful if you did indeed like this sort of stuff, that you comment down below you like the video, so that YouTube can tell me it's worth to keep doing them. I certainly enjoyed this little old sidetrack, so I wouldn't mind staying on it for a bit longer. I'm not sure what Grand Alliance I will do next, but it's probably coming shortly. Anyways, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.